So in the very first page, it shows the components of blood. You have the plasma. That is the clear extracellular matrix, okay, or the liquid connective tissue. Okay, so you want to know that what the plasma is called. Then you have the white blood cells. Okay, white blood cells are responsible for infection, okay, helping with infection. And then you have your formed elements. Okay, you have your erythrocytes, which is another term for a red blood cell. You have your leukocytes, okay, which is your white blood cells. That's the white blood cells is a form element. And your platelets. Okay, your platelets are responsible for clotting. Okay, hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is, it contains iron and it carries oxygen. Okay, so you have your hemoglobin. It consists of globins, which are your ribbon-like chains, and it consists of your heme. That contains iron. You need to know that a red blood cell or an erythrocyte lasts or the life cycle is 120 days. Okay, your erythrocyte is another term for a red blood cell. And then red bone marrow. Not sure where that is on here. It's up a little bit. Okay, well, you need to know red bone marrow. You need to know that it's formed in the long bones, okay, and the irregular bones like the scapula. I'm sorry, the irregular bones like the sternum. Okay, you need to know the term erythropoiesis. So erythropoiesis is the production of new erythrocytes. And remember, an erythrocyte is just another term for a red blood cell. So erythropoiesis is the process of producing new red blood cells or new erythrocytes. Okay, then you have the breakdown of red blood cells. So you have the heme. So if you remember, we talked about hemoglobin. You have the globin, which is broken down into amino acids. And then you have the heme, which is broken down into iron and bilirubin. Okay, the bilirubin is excreted into the intestines as bile. One of the side effects from that is jaundice. Okay, if somebody can't process and get that bilirubin out of their system, they can develop something called jaundice. Okay, your white blood cells. Okay, another term for a white blood cell is called a leukocyte. There's two different categories. The one we focused on are called the granulocytes. So the neutrophils and the eosinophils. So remember, the neutrophils are the most abundant of the white blood cells. That's important to know. The eosinophils are important to know because they are involved in allergic reactions. Okay, platelets and blood control. Remember, a platelet is a type of formed element. Okay, and they play a key role in stopping a bleeding. So you want to have an adequate amount of platelets in order to be able to stop bleeding. You need to know the term coagulation. It's up here a little bit. Okay, coagulation is just another term for blood clotting. I can't find that right now, but it is another term for blood clotting. I'm trying to find the section for anemia. Okay, anemia is a deficiency of certain things in the blood. So you can have a hemolytic or hemorrhagic anemia. Okay, so hemolytic anemia. What that is from is that you can have what's called a hemorrhage or excessive bleeding, or you have a lot of red blood cells that are being destroyed all at one time. So that's your hemolytic. You also can have something called an iron deficiency anemia. Okay, that's from not having enough iron in your body. It's very common. Another type of anemia is called pernicious anemia. That is from a lack of B12. The next thing we're going to talk about is blood types. So with blood types, you want to make sure that you know the antigens and the antibodies. So the antigen is what is on the actual red blood cell. So you want to remember that the antigen is on the red blood cell. So you have, for blood type A, you have A antigens on the red blood cell. For blood type B, you have B antigens on the red blood cell. For type A, B blood, you have A and B antigens on the red blood cell. For type O, you have no antigens on the red blood cell. Okay, now we can also talk about antibodies. For type A blood, you're going to have type B antibodies. Okay, so that's what's going to be in the matrix. The plasma is going to carry these antibodies. Type B blood has A antibodies. Okay, so you can see that that's the A antigen. Okay, that's the B antibody. That is the B antigen. That's the A antibody. Type A and type AB blood has no antigens, and type O blood has A antibodies and B antibodies. So I said it incorrectly for type AB. So type AB has A and B antigens on the red blood cell, and it has no antibodies in the plasma. Type O has no antigens on the red blood cell, but they have A and B antibodies in the plasma. Okay, and this shows it again. Type A blood has A antigens on the red blood cells, and B antibodies in the plasma. Type B has B antigens on the blood cell and type A antibodies. Okay, when you get the wrong blood, what happens is the blood clumps together in a process called agglutination, and that can cause death. You need to know the universal donor and the universal recipient for blood. Blood type O is the universal donor. Blood type AB is the universal recipient. Okay, you can also have an Rh positive or Rh negative in the blood. Okay, Rh negative does not have the specific antigen, the Rh antigen. R positive has the Rh antigen. Okay, I wouldn't focus too much on that. Okay, mostly we want to know the different blood types. For the questions for chapter 14, for anybody who did not write it down or does not have that, the questions are questions 2, questions 4, question 6, question 9, and question 10. Okay, chapter 15 is the heart. Okay, the heart, on the very first page, it talks about the heart. It has your base is at the top, your apex is at the bottom, okay, bottom left. It's the point of maximum impulse where this heartbeat is the strongest to be heard and to be felt. The different heart layers. Okay, the main layers I want you to focus on are the endocardium, the myocardium, and the epicardium. And you need to know that the endocardium, the myocardium, and the epicardium, you need to know those 3 layers. They're all part of the pericardium. Okay. If you look on page 297, it's going to talk about the atrium and the ventricle of the heart. So the question is, name the 4 chambers of the heart and describe their function. Okay, so the atrium, okay, those are the top 2 chambers of the heart. Okay, and what they do is they either receive blood from the body or from the lungs. So they're the reservoir. They hold the blood. And the bottom, these 2 bottom parts you can see are the ventricles. You have the right ventricle and you have the left ventricle. The ventricles are responsible for pumping the blood out into the body. Okay, or into the lungs, depending on which one it is. So the atrium receive the blood, okay, and the ventricles pump the blood. Okay, remember in class we talked about valves. So the importance of valves is to keep blood from flowing backwards. So the idea is when blood is going through the heart that it does not flow backwards or go into a backwards motion. So you have two different kinds of valves. You have your atrioventricular valves, or your AV valves. Okay, these valves regulate the flow between the right atria and the ventricles. Okay, your atria, flow between your atria and ventricles, both your right side and your left side. Okay, so the right AV valve, or atrioventricular valve, is called the tricuspid. That prevents backflow from the right ventricle to the right atrium. The way I like to remember it is that the right atrium and the right ventricle, the valve that connects those is the tricuspid valve. So the blood goes from the right atrium to the right ventricle through the tricuspid valve. Okay, the left AV valve is going to go from the left atrium to the left ventricle. So the left AV valve is called the bicuspid valve. Sometimes it's called the mitral valve. Okay, remember I said in class, try it before you buy it. So tricuspid is between the right side of the heart, and bicuspid is between the left side of the heart. So try it before you buy it. So these are between the four chambers. Okay, the right AV valve connects the right and left atrium and ventricle. The left AV valve connects the left atrium and the left ventricle. The semilunar valves, what these connect is these connect the ventricle to whatever part of the body they're going to. So the right ventricle, the blood is going from the right ventricle to the lungs. So the pulmonary valve is what connects those two sections. The aortic valve goes through the left ventricle to the aorta. So that connects those two structures in the heart. So this is on page 300. It shows that the blood is coming in to the right atrium, which is this section right here is the right atrium. This is the right atrium. It's blue because it doesn't have any oxygen in it yet. It's going from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve, sorry, I didn't mean to make it plural, tricuspid valve, to the right ventricle. And as you go down here, you can see the blood's in the right ventricle. It's going from the right ventricle up into the lungs. You can see this valve here is the pulmonary valve. Right ventricle up to the lungs through the pulmonary valve. Now it's coming back into the left atrium. You can see it's red because it picked up oxygen in the lungs. So you're in your left ventricle. Left atrium. It's going from the left atrium to the left ventricle through the mitral or the tricuspid valve. And then you're going from the left ventricle through the aortic valve to the aorta. And then it goes out to the body. You can see it's oxygenated. Okay, so again, very quickly, the blood comes from the body. Remember, blood to the atrium either comes from the body, or from the lungs. So in this case, it's coming from the body, right atrium. Okay, from the right atrium, it goes through the right ventricle, through the tricuspid valve. From the right ventricle, it goes to the lungs through the pulmonary valve. From the lungs, it goes to the left atrium. From the left atrium, it goes to the left ventricle through the mitral or bicuspid valve. From the left ventricle, it goes to the aorta and out to the body through the aortic valve. And that is the review for this chapter. The questions on the back are questions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I hope you found this review helpful.